Well, hello and welcome, amazing students, to week number 7, Abnormal Psychology. And I know I say this a lot, but can you believe it? The class is almost over, right? We're barely scratching the surface in terms of abnormal psychology. There's really a lot to it, diagnostics, and a lot of students have asked me a lot of questions, a lot of deeper questions, and just know and trust, right now it's all about learning the basics. As you're going to get deeper into your educational career, you're certainly going to touch on diagnostics throughout your program now, but as you get deeper in your education to a master's or a doctoral program, I assure you you're going to go quite deep in terms of diagnostics. But not to say we're not going to cover a lot of great stuff here for the last couple of weeks, but as we say that, and I certainly want to really talk about this, the end is near. And what does that really mean? Well, classes tend to go a little bit quicker as we get towards the end because there's a lot of stuff going on. Usually there's a project, a large project, or a couple of large submissions that'll happen towards the end of the class, and so that you want to make sure that you're on track. But make sure you're complete, make sure everything in the grade book looks complete and accurate. I can't always promise you're going to get the grade that you would like to see, but certainly make sure everything has been graded. You got some feedback on all this stuff. Nothing got overlooked. I'm pretty meticulous, as are all instructors on campus, but sometimes things get hidden, or we didn't quite see something, or something came in late, we didn't catch it. So just make sure everything is current and accurate, and make sure you're caught up in the course. That, of course, is a good thing to do. If you're missing anything from this past week, get on it right now, because you have project number 2 coming up this week, and there's a lot to do with that. If you need support with anything, if you're looking at something that doesn't look quite right, reach out and get support from me ASAP, or the appropriate person, of course, on campus, because again, before you know it, this class is going to be over, you're going to be on to the next, and it's always easier to take care of things in advance as opposed to trying to figure or fix something out later. So there is a couple of things to be aware of. I know there's a number of new students in this course in their first or second term, so just be aware that your next class will pop up, or possibly your next 2 classes or so will pop up on your dashboard here next week, Monday. And a lot of questions come up. What does this mean and how does this kind of work? So I'm going to give you a couple of tips, a couple of powerful success tips for students. In fact, my most powerful success tip right here at the end of the video. So make sure watch all the way through. I know, tedious, but there's going to be some great information in there in terms of the expectations for the assignments this week. So you want to make sure that you're on track. We're going to take that 7,000 foot view look at what's going on, just kind of get that overall picture of what to expect this week. We are going to be diving into PowerPoint, and before we do, this is just a little prompter to do that so I can talk about the assignments this week first, and I'm going to swing back around and talk about PowerPoint, because in your project submissions this week you're actually going to be making a presentation, not writing a paper. So again, make sure and be in the know of what to do in terms of expectations. So Module 7 here, these are the learning objectives that we'll break down this week. And again, we're going to talk heavily about things regarding diagnostics. And in terms of the project this week, you're going to pick a diagnosis, if you will, something maybe we've talked about in the last few weeks, and you're going to run with it through a series of questions in and around some of this stuff. But again, if you've done your homework over the last 3-4 weeks in terms of those prep assignments for the project this week, you're going to be just fine in the submission. And again, I'm going to give you some tips and insights for the presentation, so don't worry about that, but do make sure that you are catching up and on top of your readings this week. In particular, this first one here, researchers doubt that certain mental disorders are disorders at all. It's an interesting little question that's been raised, and to talk a little bit more about this as we get into this, make sure and read this article. It's speaking to things such as environmental stressors, which say, for example, if you lose a significant other, you lose a loved one in your life, and you're going through a bout of depression, the question is this a true disorder? Is this a chemical kind of imbalance within your body, or is this a situational or an environmental stressor? And so it's an interesting question that's raised, and it's things that talked about often. And There's a lot of like mixed opinions about how this looks in terms of symptomology, in terms of actual diagnostics, but one way or another, treatment usually results in the same. So just make sure you're up on top of that. There is some stuff in here this week that's also talking about the APA Code of Ethics, in particular the general principles and things along those lines this week as we talk about some of these things. And a number of students are headed either into social work, mental health, or, general psychology as a psychologist or something along those lines. And I encourage you to go through and read through these materials. If you're a psychologist or practicing in the mental health profession at any level, you should be aware of all these things. The American Psychological Association, similar to the American Medical Association, dictates much of what happens in the industry. And so whether or not you're a psychologist, if you're a social worker, you're going to have your own code of ethics. It's going to be very similar to the APA code of ethics, I assure you. But certainly there's a lot of things in here you will have to adhere to one way or another. So make sure that you're responsible and accountable by knowing all of these things, and just kind of peruse those as we're going through some of the stuff this week as we get into the discussion board. We're going to talk about those labels and if a disorder is really a disorder or not, right? And I think what that article speaks about in terms of, again, a chemical imbalance versus a true environmental thing. If you had something that was situational that hit you, is that truly a disorder, or is that some type of event stressor, if you will? So again, take a look at this stuff. And one thing that I wanted to really talk about in terms of discussion post-development is I was looking through this and I looked at a couple of these general things that pop up often. I wanted to just reiterate a few of these things. When we're writing discussion posts, we're acknowledging our peers, we're writing some good insights, we're certainly addressing the question, we're participating in the board. I want you all to think about this as if it were a live in-class conversation. And if I was at the board and I asked a question and Tammy answered the question, and then Elizabeth replied, and then Sam asked a question, and so on and so forth. That's in theory how a discussion board is supposed to look like. Obviously, it's a little bit different as we're in an online format and we're writing text on a screen, but nonetheless, just think about it in those contexts and maybe asking a question or, extending the conversation, if you will, that engagement, if you will, is what we're looking for. One other thing that I wanted to talk on as we're talking about ethics and ethical considerations this week is the ethical usage in terms of research. And I know there's a lot of questions about the research. If you didn't catch the video I did last week, make sure to watch that. Little update video in terms of adding research. And again, I think a lot of the things I talked about in this video that I still believe is a lot of students aren't accessing good research. They're not reading quality research, which has a format that you probably want to learn and embrace and really get a hold of to help you through the program and your next program. But certainly the way the research is laid out in some of the better quality articles is much more in alignment with how you actually want to be writing your papers. And so I would encourage you to use the research that's more in alignment with what the expectations are throughout the program. Better quality research will give you a better written product. Nonetheless, here's some tips and guidelines about when to cite, which, as you can see down here, when do you not cite common knowledge? Okay, when do you cite everything else? And so just make sure you're validating your statements. And that's really what we're talking about here when you look at this kind of stuff up here. Why are we citing? We're providing some type of validation for our statement. It's not something we just made up. We pulled this information from the research. We're giving validity to what it is that we're talking about. So take a look at this. If you're having any questions in terms of the ethics or usage or how to cite something, again, watch that video from last week, reach out. Writing Lab is a great resource as well. So with that in mind, let's talk about the project, because I do want to dive in and give you some tips directly in terms of development, and also a couple of great student tips here as we wrap up in the end. For the project number 2, I was going to say project this week, but really kind of the culmination of the class, if you will, putting together this project. You're going to want to make sure and read through all this stuff a couple of times. I would highly recommend that first. Just read through this a couple of times so you're very familiar, because there are a number of questions in here. And as you get down to the bottom, it talks about 21 slides. And I personally counted 20 points in here. So maybe there's one hidden. Maybe they're counting the cover page. But you're going to develop a PowerPoint presentation of this content. So as opposed to writing a paper, you get the opportunity to do a PowerPoint presentation, and I will talk through a few tips and insights to help make this a little bit easier for you here in just a moment. But again, I want to stress up front, don't look at this as, oh, I just have to throw together a PowerPoint presentation at the end of the week. You're going to want to put some time and energy into this, because as you're about to see, there's a lot to this that you're going to need to put together. So read through this a couple of times so that you're very clear on what the expectations are. In the introduction section here, it talks about introducing the disorder that you've chosen, the biological, psychological, social relevance related to that particular disorder, the overview of any clinical considerations and so forth that we want to be aware of in terms of looking at this, as some of the things that we're talking about here in the introduction. By the way, as suggested in Shapiro Library FAQ, okay, supporting materials for your presentation, plan ahead, be consistent, keep it simple, be short, okay? So you're going to be providing a lot of information in a concise manner, okay? So it's very important that you keep that in mind. For part one, you've got the biopsychological considerations, and you're going to put together and address probably a slide or so for each one of these. Now, I'm going to put something or plant a seed in your mind as I'm talking through this with you. If you think in terms of, in general, when you create a PowerPoint slide, if you are actually presenting that content, it's about 2 minutes per slide. That's not an absolute. Sometimes I'll go through slides very quickly. Sometimes we'll have transitions. Sometimes I might spend 5 or 10 minutes on a slide. But as a rule of thumb, if you think in terms of a 20-slide presentation is about a 40-minute PowerPoint presentation. So if you think in terms of putting maybe 2 slides worth of content for each one of these, you would essentially exponentially increase the length of your PowerPoint presentation. So I want you guys to think in those terms. Your final presentation should be in around 20, 22, 24, 26 slides of content. Then you've got a cover slide, then you've got maybe a slide or two of references, and you might have a couple of slides in the middle that are called transition slides. But really we're looking for, as you can see down below, 21 slides of content, and that's addressing this stuff. You also want to keep in mind you don't want to go too lengthy on this content, because on presentations we're putting bullet point information in there, not complete sentences. So make sure, again, you need to be concise with this information and also add some graphics. And so here's the information that you're going to address. And I'm not going to go into each one of these in lengths, although there were a couple of students that had some questions in here that were related to diagnosis by exclusion. Okay, so when we look at diagnostic evaluations and considerations, when someone comes in and they're presenting with various symptoms, and let's say, for example, it's depression. So somebody comes in and they're very down, and we're looking through and we're asking them questions, we're doing the intake, and we're looking at diagnostic considerations for something like depression or really any disorder. One of the things that we want to really consider is there any reason why this person might have this disorder that's not some type of chemical related thing? For example, is somebody bipolar? There's not a situation really that caused them to be that way. There's something going on in their body, okay? There's that chemical imbalance that we talk about. There's some things happening in there that's not quite right. Versus somebody comes into your office and they present with depression, but through talking with them and doing the intake, you find out that this person lost their husband of 25 years just 2 months earlier. Well, it is pretty likely that that is a significant life stressor. Okay, so that could be something that we're excluding. Or it could be the person just found out that he or she has cancer, and they're very depressed about that. Well, now we might have depression due to significant life stressor due to general medical condition. Somebody has anxiety due to a general medical condition. And so we're excluding diagnosis because of another factor. So those are some of the things that you want to consider. And as you go through the readings this week, it will talk about some of these things that you'll want to consider. In fact, the one reading we're talking about for the discussion this week is talking about some of those things as well. Because again, if somebody presents with depression, but it's because they just lost someone that they love, now we're talking about an environmental stressor as opposed to a true, again, chemical imbalance. I use that loosely because I think people just don't always have a chemical imbalance, but just aren't wired or perhaps have enough intact resources to accommodate or take care of the stressor. So, but I digress. So nonetheless, I hope that information helps to get you on track. So again, make sure and read through this a couple of times, make some notes so you will be well prepared to do this. And what you're going to be turning in, as I talked about, was a PowerPoint presentation. This is a minimum of 21 slides. That's to cover your content area, and you'll probably have a few additional slides, cover slide, references, maybe a couple transitions in there. You're also going to have notes in with each one of your slides, and this is 50 to 100 words. And really what you're going to be writing in these notes is maybe some prompter, some text that you would say, some things to help keep you on track if you were actually doing a presentation, okay? Most of you, or many of you at least, have probably done some of these submissions in the past, and so I'm going to walk you through a couple of things in relation to PowerPoint to help get you on track with what to put in these presentations or how to develop your presentation, if you will. So I'm going to start off with some good information that probably should have gave to you a few weeks ago, and then the process to write a paper. Now this is just the process, gang. This is not the specific nuts and bolts how-to. This is just the 5,000-foot view of the process of how we write a paper, okay? So I want you to think through this. When you're going to write a paper, when you're going to write a discussion post, whenever you're going to do a project, whenever you're going to do something in written form, what is the first thing that we're going to do is the scope of the project, right? We need to understand what it is that we're going to put together. What are the requirements? What is the assignment about? How do we define that project? Okay, so for example, this week, as I talk about, we're going to pick a disorder, we're going to answer those questions, we're going to create a PowerPoint presentation and so forth. Okay, now you know what you need to do. But those list of questions in there, all of those things that you need to include in your presentation, those are really kind of defining your project. That's giving you a direction for research, which leads us into our second step, if you will. And that's where we're going to go look for the answers to these questions. Now, if you've done your readings throughout the course, you've prepped over the last few weeks in terms of doing some good research in the development of your submissions, then you've already done half of your research, maybe more. Okay, but there's probably some questions that are still unanswered from that list of questions, and so you want to make sure that you're reading all the research that you need to complete the submission, to write that. Okay, put some notes in the margin, put some notes on scratch paper or notepad. I sometimes, honestly, will print, if I have like a 10 or 12 page article that I'm reading, I'll print it and I'll carry it with me and I'll write notes in the margin, and then I can refer to those notes when I'm writing my paper and I can go back and forth. It's very easy that way. The next step we want to do is to outline our information, right? So we've read 4 articles, we've got some great information, we've put some notes in the margins, or we've written some notes on our scratch paper. Now the next step is to outline what we're doing. Now, if we go back to those objectives, those original questions that we have to address when we've got the scope of the project, that list of 20 some odd questions that we're going to answer, that is sort of the basis for your outline. And you might adjust the text, some of the terminology might be a little different, but you've got kind of a skeleton of your outline. Now you just need to have some information, and if you've done the research, you've got some good information to add to your outline. So maybe each one of those questions is a subpoint, and you're going to have some additional bullet points under each one of those, and that's the information that you've gleaned from your research. So hopefully everybody's following me so far, right? And I know some of you are scratching your head saying, but Dr. J, we're going to do a presentation this week, so bear with me. This is good information that you have with this, but it's also going to help you get in alignment with your presentations this week, because the next step is to draft your paper. So if we have an outline and it is complete, and by the way, let me pause this for a moment. I know there are a lot of students that don't follow this process when they're writing a paper, when they're doing discussion. I do this for everything. If I'm writing a 2-paragraph discussion post, I write a quick outline. I fill in a few blanks. I put a couple thoughts and ideas in there. I add some research. I pop it out. It's probably one of the reasons why I can write a 250, 300 word discussion post in like less than an hour. There's a reason why I can write papers in a very short amount of time. There's a reason why my students that I coach write papers very aggressively. It's because they follow the process. It makes it easy for them. It's very complete. They get straight A's as a result. It's all good. So you want to follow the process. Okay, so now from your outline, you're going to expand and you're going to start drafting your paper. You've got a thorough outline, you've got some good notes, you've got good bullet points in there, you've expanded those thoughts and ideas, you've added the research in there, you've got your in-text citations, you've got your research in there. Now it's just a matter of reviewing, editing, maybe working with a writing coach in the writing lab and creating a final draft, right? Okay, that's the process to create a paper. So, your question obviously is, what are we going to do to create a presentation? Okay, so here's what the good news is. Step number 1 is exactly the same. It's telling me what time it is, okay? Scope of the project is identical in steps. Research is identical in the steps. So you already know how to do the first 2 things, and guess what? You already know how to do the third one, because if you create an outline, you will have the bullet points, which are probably going to be your main pages. Then you're going to have all that little snippet information that you can put as bullet points on the individual slides, right? You take that information, which is identical to what you would do to write a paper, and now you're going to start to draft your presentation. If you have a solid outline, you now have the 20, 21, 22 pages that you're going to create and those headers for those pages. And you've also got bullet points under each one of those that you can now add in terms of content back to your presentation. Put all that stuff in there, take a look, tweak, edit, modify, and then you're going to come back with your final presentation, which you're going to revise and review and edit and modify, and you're going to put images in there that match your content and transitions and all that kind of stuff. But you're going to put that stuff in as you go towards the end, and that's like finalizing your final draft. The process is the same, gang, for the first 3 steps. I really want to stress that. If you open up PowerPoint and stare at a blank screen with a textbook in front of you thinking you're just going to add information in there, you're making this much harder than you need to be. Much harder than you need to be on yourself. You're certainly creating a bigger task that's probably not going to be as good, complete, and as thorough, and it's a lot harder to accomplish. You're also not going to learn as much. So choose easy, follow the process. It's going to be easier for you. It's going to be a better presentation. You'll get a better grade. You usually learn more in the process. And so I'm going to bounce back now and give you a couple of tips and show you in terms of creating PowerPoint. I did want to talk about a few things here real quick in terms of the rubric, because I don't know that students always look at this carefully before they jump into an assignment. But I want to stress this in terms of this. What we're doing is creating a PowerPoint presentation in lieu of doing a paper, okay? But you still got to put some time and energy into the development of this. And what I mean by this is where you want to focus your energy on is in terms of your content development. If you look through here, this is largely content development, which is going to be the information you put on the slides. It's going to be the notes you add for it. You know, I'm certainly going to include, if you've got some good graphic representation in for your content, you found some good images to illustrate your point. Remember, presentations, and as it talks about in here, You're giving a presentation to somebody. You need me to be excited about your information. You need to hold my interest in your presentation. Now, the luxury is you're not giving the presentation. Thus, for starters, take a big sigh of relief. You don't actually have to physically present. Although, by the way, I'll tell you something. I do teach classes where the students are required to present, and in those cases, it's usually much easier for them because it's so overwhelming to do the presentation. I usually give them a little bit of a break in terms of the content. So there's no presentations here, so I'm going to be more critical of your content. But what I want to stress is there's no need to do a lot of animation. There's no need to go in and do these elaborate transitions because I'm not grading or evaluating that, okay? I'm also not seeing it. So if you put all that time and energy in it, it's like, oh, you spent 10 hours doing this really beautiful PowerPoint presentation, it's not going to result in any more credit for you. So let go of that. Make a nice presentation, good slides, good content, some good graphics throughout, but you don't have to worry about the transitions and the animations and all the fancy stuff, okay? So hopefully that will help to make it a little bit easier. Now, I'm going to, hopefully, there we go. Bear with me. Start out on a new slide. And when you come in to do a PowerPoint presentation, you're typically going to see something that looks like this when you start. And you can come in and you can type in, this is my title. Okay? Here, of course, they're going to put your name in there. Okay. Learn how to spell psychology, right? Just had one of those moments where my brain went blank. Okay, so you're going to start with your presentation. Now, again, I want to stress to you, if you've created an outline and you've got all that information on your outline, all you're really doing is transferring information from point A to point B. There's actually a process to do this with inside PowerPoint. I personally think it's better to copy and paste your text or to just retype your text in once you have it all put together, but there is a way that you can actually import the content in there. If you send me a message, I'll give you some tips and insights to head in that direction, but I think it's a better build when you just type it in there yourself or put the information in there. But again, start with the outline. Now, the next thing I want to stress to you, it says in the instructions, and you certainly are at choice on whether or not you want to use PowerPoint or Google Slides or Prezi or anything else. But I'll tell you from experience of grading hundreds and, well, honestly, thousands. I've actually graded tens of thousands of PowerPoint presentations. It will by far be the easiest for you to use PowerPoint. It will have all the tools and resources in it you need to be successful, and it will have the tools and resources needed to help you do your notes and actually submit something that is super easy for me to grade. So it's like a win across the board, but it's your choice. I always throw that out there and love to see what students choose easy or what students choose hard, but this is the reason why I'm going to show you this. Let's say this is your subtopic for whatever it might be. Okay, you're talking about depression and you're listing one of the subtopics in there that you need to address. Okay, item 1, item 2, item 3. Okay, and we have sub-item, etc. Okay, so you're going to put your items in there. You can play around with the layouts. Some of you are going to be a little more familiar and comfortable with PowerPoint than others. There's a plethora of resources out there. I could send some additional resources this week, but I mainly want to focus in on a couple of things in terms of your submission, okay? So down below, you can see where it says click to add your notes. If you don't see that, if you click the little note icon here, it will pop open. You can drag this up if you choose. So once you've created your slides and you have your 25 slides done, you now can come in here and you can add your notes. Okay, Think in terms of if you were doing a speech. Many of you have been there, right? Elementary school, you had to stand up, you had to do a little 5-minute speech, or you were doing something you had to do, and you had like little note cards. And the note cards had little bullet points, things that you were going to say while you were presenting. That's what you're putting here, okay? That's all the fun facts, the items that aren't on the slide. You're not going to take your entire paper and copy and paste it in here. You're going to have like 100 words, 150 words down here that says the information that you would want to talk about as you're on this slide. Now remember, there's information on the slide. That will be a prompter for you. But this is the extra, the filler information. Because if you ever notice, this is a great slide, for example, I talked a lot, right? Well, that's who I am. I talk a lot, but I didn't have notes on this slide. But if this was a more technical presentation and I needed some dates or some figures or some diagnostic specifics or prevalence or whatever the kind of thing that I might need for presentation, I could have this down below and it would be available to just me while I'm presenting, and I can talk about that information back to the audience, okay? So you're going to put the slide notes in underneath if you're using PowerPoint, okay? Now, again, if you've done stuff that's so funny. There we go. Here's some more great info. If you've done a lot of stuff in Microsoft Word, you can just copy and paste stuff right over to it. Okay? Easy peasy. Now, when you are done, there's a few ways that you can present this. I would prefer the way I'm about to show you, and you're about to see why as well. Now, I'm going to give you another great student tip. And I don't know why students don't just naturally get this one. But here's a tip for you. The more time an instructor spends on your submission, the more likelihood he or she will find an error. The better your submission looks, the less likely they're going to see some little stuff. And what I mean by that, I'm not just saying we're going to just like glaze over stuff, but when I get a submission that's in perfect APA formatting, that the references all check out and everything looks good, and I'm reading through their submission, I'm less inclined to see a few typos or a couple of word choice errors. But if I open up the submission and the fonts are out of alignment and their margins are off, and I'm looking at stuff and I'm trying to figure out what they did and didn't do, and now I'm starting to see more errors because I'm looking deeper, I'm not saying their grade is going to be higher or lower. All I'm saying is the more time an instructor spends on a submission, it increases your chance of having him or her find more errors in your submission. This is just a general student tip, gang. So here is a way that you could submit your presentation very, very easily. So not only can I just grade it easily, but it'll quickly show you and I your entire presentation. When you are done, and this will only work if you've done it in PowerPoint, by the way, when you save your presentation, you are going to save this as a PDF. And I have to, bear with me for a second, do this. Okay, I'm on a Mac, so some things are going to be slightly different for you. But you're going to print a PDF of the version. And before you do this, very important, if you only send a PDF of your presentation, you're not going to get full credit. This is only going to work if you follow these exact steps, gang, because if I can't see it, I can't grade it. Come down here and you're going to select slides, handouts, blah, 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 notes. You're going to click on note view, and what you're going to do is you're going to save this as a PDF. I'm just going to open it so you can see what it looks like. Okay, and it's on another screen. I'm going to pull it up. Here's slide number 1. Here's slide number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. Hey gang, Dr. J here, and I realized that the last minute or so of the video was lost somehow in post-production, so let me just recap. Once you've completed your presentation in PowerPoint only, you've added your notes down below, you can come over here, make sure and save it, open up to print, and now just make sure that you select the note view, and generally you're going to save it or you're going to print a PDF. And if I click the right button, I'll be able to show you what a preview looks like. As I pull it up down below, this is the actual version that would show when you're complete. You can have your notes added here. You can see you can even change the font size and the color and so forth. And so this is a great way to include all of your content into one easy file that I can see very easily in the speed grader. And it's just one submission to do. Now again, you can submit the actual PowerPoint file. If you choose to do it another way, you might have to actually have your notes in a separate Microsoft Word file aside from the presentation itself. So whatever you choose to do, just make sure I can see it all. But again, this would be preferred. So if you do have any questions, make sure to reach out. Have a great and productive week, and I look forward to engaging with you in the discussion board and grading your submissions at the end of the week. Have a great week.